The courthouse in downtown Atlanta was buzzing with activity that Tuesday morning. People from all walks of life filled the hallways, but everyone seemed to be talking about the same case. Officer James Mitchell, a police officer with 15 years on the force, was about to face trial for something that had shocked the entire community. Mitchell sat at the defense table, his uniform replaced by a plain gray suit that seemed too tight around his broad shoulders. His hands were clasped together, knuckles white from the pressure. Every few seconds, his eyes darted around the room, taking in the faces of those who had come to witness his day of reckoning. When Judge Anthony Robinson entered the courtroom, the atmosphere changed instantly. The judge was a tall man with silver streaks in his black hair, carrying himself with the dignity that comes from 20 years of serving justice. As he took his seat at the bench, Mitchell's face tightened. He hadn't expected this, a black judge presiding over his case. The prosecutor, Ms. Patricia Chen, stood up to begin her opening statement. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here today because Officer Mitchell violated the very oath he swore to uphold. The evidence will show a disturbing pattern of behavior that targeted citizens based solely on the color of their skin." Mitchell shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His lawyer, Robert Henderson, placed a hand on his shoulder, but Mitchell shrugged it off. The tension in his jaw was visible to everyone in the front rows. As the prosecutor continued, she painted a picture that made several jury members shake their heads in disbelief. Over the past 5 years, Officer Mitchell has been involved in 27 traffic stops. 23 of those stops involved black drivers. The evidence will show that many of these stops had no legitimate cause. The first piece of evidence was a compilation of dashboard camera footage. The courtroom fell silent as they watched Mitchell pulling over a young black college student who was driving exactly at the speed limit. The student's hands were visible on the steering wheel, his voice respectful as he asked why he had been stopped. Mitchell's response was aggressive from the start, demanding the student exit the vehicle for what he called a routine check. Judge Robinson watched the footage carefully, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp and observant. He had seen cases like this before, but something about Mitchell's demeanor suggested this might be worse than the usual complaints. Throughout the morning, more evidence piled up. There were audio recordings of Mitchell using inappropriate language during arrests. There were written complaints from citizens who felt they had been unfairly targeted. There were testimonies from other officers who had witnessed Mitchell's behavior but had been too afraid to speak up until now. During a brief recess, Mitchell paced in the hallway. His former colleagues avoided eye contact as they passed by. He overheard whispers, people calling him a disgrace to the badge. The reality of his situation was starting to sink in. Back in the courtroom, Judge Robinson maintained order with a calm but firm presence. When Mitchell's lawyer tried to object to certain pieces of evidence, the judge listened carefully before making his rulings. His fairness was evident even as Mitchell grew more agitated with each passing hour. As the afternoon sun streamed through the tall courthouse windows, the prosecution called their first witness. A grandmother who had been roughly handled during a traffic stop last summer. Her voice shook as she described how Mitchell had pulled her from her car, claiming she fit the description of a suspect. She had been on her way to pick up her grandchildren from school. Mitchell's face remained stone-like, but his leg bounced nervously under the table. The weight of his actions was becoming impossible to ignore. As the grandmother finished her testimony, several people in the gallery wiped away tears. The first day of the trial was drawing to a close, but everyone could feel that this was just the beginning. The evidence against Mitchell was mounting, and the community that had once trusted him to serve and protect was now seeing a very different side of the man behind the badge. The second day of the trial started with heavy rain pounding against the courthouse windows. The gloomy weather seemed to match the mood inside the courtroom. Officer Mitchell arrived early, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He had spent the night replaying yesterday's testimonies in his mind, each one chipping away at the wall of denial he had built around himself. Defense attorney Robert Henderson tried a different approach today. He stood before the jury with a warm smile, attempting to paint Mitchell as a dedicated officer who had simply been doing his job in a tough neighborhood. "Ladies and gentlemen, police work isn't pretty. Sometimes officers have to make split-second decisions that might look questionable from the comfort of a courtroom." But the strategy began to fall apart when the prosecution played more body camera footage. This time, it showed Mitchell during a routine traffic stop from 6 months ago. A young father was driving his daughter to a doctor's appointment when Mitchell pulled him over. The man's daughter could be heard crying in the backseat as Mitchell ordered him out of the car at gunpoint. License and registration didn't matter to Officer Mitchell that day, the prosecutor stated. The only thing that mattered was the driver's skin color. The footage showed the man pleading with Mitchell, explaining his daughter was sick and needed to get to the hospital. Mitchell's response was cold and dismissive. Judge Robinson leaned forward, his brow furrowed as he watched the scene unfold. Even the defense attorney seemed uncomfortable as the footage played on. The little girl's cries echoed through the silent courtroom, and several jury members looked away, unable to watch. As witness after witness took the stand, a pattern became crystal clear. There was Ms. Johnson, a schoolteacher who was handcuffed in front of her students during a field trip. There was Mr. Williams, a veteran who was thrown to the ground during a traffic stop, his military ID ignored. Each story was more troubling than the last. Mitchell's composure began to crack. During the lunch break, a court officer overheard him muttering something under his breath, words that made even his own lawyer step away from him. The tension in the courtroom was building to a breaking point. When court resumed, the prosecution called Officer Daniel Peters to the stand. Peters had been Mitchell's partner for 2 years and had finally decided to speak up. His hands trembled as he took the oath. "I tried to tell myself he was just being thorough," Peters testified, his voice barely above a whisper. "But after a while, I couldn't ignore it anymore. He would always find a reason to pull over certain drivers, always the same type of people." Mitchell's face turned red. He scribbled furious notes and pushed them toward his lawyer. Henderson read them and shook his head, refusing to ask the questions Mitchell wanted. This only made Mitchell angrier. The most damaging testimony came from the police department's own records. Statistics showed that Mitchell's arrest rate for black citizens was 5 times higher than any other officer in his precinct. His use of force reports showed a similar pattern. The numbers didn't lie, and they painted a picture that was impossible to defend. As the afternoon wore on, Mitchell became increasingly agitated. He shifted in his seat, mumbled to himself, and glared at witnesses. When a soft-spoken elderly man described being roughed up during a case of mistaken identity, Mitchell actually scoffed loud enough for the jury to hear. Judge Robinson's patience was wearing thin. "Officer Mitchell, you will maintain proper courtroom decorum," he warned, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Mitchell's lawyer placed a firm hand on his client's arm, but the damage was done. The jury had seen his true colors. The day ended with perhaps the most powerful testimony yet. A video compilation showed Mitchell at various community events over the years. In each clip, his body language changed noticeably when interacting with citizens of different backgrounds. The contrast was stark and undeniable. As the courtroom emptied for the day, the writing on the wall was becoming clearer. Mitchell's career, his reputation, and his freedom were all hanging by a thread. But nobody could have predicted what would happen next. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing within the courthouse walls. The third day of the trial arrived with an unusual tension in the air. The security officers at the courthouse entrance seemed more alert than usual, checking bags more thoroughly. Nobody knew why, but everyone could feel something was different today. Officer Mitchell looked worse than ever. His suit was wrinkled, his tie crooked, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He had stopped pretending to take notes and now sat slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the table in front of him. The prosecution was ready to deliver their final blow. They had saved their most damaging evidence for last, a video that nobody had seen before. It showed Mitchell during an arrest from last year, where he was caught on a bystander's phone planting evidence in a suspect's car. As the video played on the courtroom's large screen, gasps echoed through the room. The footage was crystal clear. Mitchell could be seen reaching into his pocket, pulling out a small bag, and slipping it under the car seat when he thought no one was watching. The suspect, a young college student, had always maintained his innocence. Now everyone knew why. Mitchell's lawyer buried his face in his hands. There was no defending this. The judge leaned forward, his expression grave as he watched the video play through twice more at the prosecution's request. When the prosecutor began questioning Mitchell about the video, something inside him snapped. His face turned bright red, veins bulging in his neck. He stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You don't understand what it's like out there," Mitchell shouted, his voice cracking. "You sit in your comfortable offices and judge us, but you don't know what we face every day." The judge banged his gavel. "Officer Mitchell, sit down immediately." But Mitchell was beyond listening. Years of buried anger and prejudice came pouring out. As he ranted, his hand moved toward his ankle. In the chaos of the past few days, security had missed something during their check, a small backup weapon Mitchell always carried. Time seemed to slow down as Mitchell reached down and pulled out a compact pistol from an ankle holster. Screams erupted in the courtroom. People dove for cover, ducking behind benches and scrambling toward the exits. But Mitchell wasn't aiming at the crowd. He raised the gun and pointed it directly at Judge Robinson. The bailiffs reached for their weapons, but they were too far away. The judge's secretary let out a terrified scream. Mitchell's own lawyer stumbled backward, knocking over his chair in shock. "You think you can judge me?" Mitchell's voice was barely recognizable, twisted with rage. "You don't know anything about me or what I've been through." Judge Robinson remained perfectly still in his chair, his eyes locked with Mitchell's, and something remarkable happened. Instead of showing fear, the judge's face remained calm, almost serene. The courtroom fell into an eerie silence. Even the people who had been running for the exit stopped, transfixed by the scene unfolding before them. The only sound was Mitchell's heavy breathing and the quiet whirring of the air conditioning. The bailiffs had their weapons drawn but didn't dare shoot, afraid they might hit the judge or cause Mitchell to fire. The prosecutor had ducked under her table, her papers scattered across the floor. In the gallery, people held their breath, some covering their mouths in horror. Mitchell's hand shook as he kept the gun trained on the judge. Sweat dripped down his forehead, and his finger twitched on the trigger. The weight of what he was doing seemed to hit him all at once, but he was too far gone to back down now. 15 years, Mitchell muttered, his voice breaking. 15 years I gave to this city, and this is how it ends. Being judged by someone who doesn't understand what it's like on the streets. The judge still hadn't moved. His hands remained visible on his desk, his posture relaxed despite the barrel of a gun pointed at his chest. Something in his calmness seemed to unsettle Mitchell even more than if he had shown fear. As seconds stretched into what felt like hours, everyone in the courtroom waited for what would happen next. Would Mitchell pull the trigger? Would the bailiffs risk a shot? Or would something entirely unexpected unfold? The answer was about to surprise everyone in that room, creating a moment that would be talked about in legal circles for years to come. The courtroom held its breath as Judge Robinson slowly rose from his chair. The gun in Mitchell's hand wavered slightly, but remained pointed at the judge's chest. What happened next would leave everyone speechless. Instead of ducking for cover or calling for help, Judge Robinson did something extraordinary. He raised his hands slowly, not in surrender, but in a gesture of peace. His voice, when he spoke, was steady and warm, like a father speaking to a troubled son. "Officer Mitchell," he said softly, "I want you to look at me. Really look at me." Mitchell blinked, confused by the judge's calm demeanor. His finger remained on the trigger, but something in the judge's voice made him hesitate. "I am not your enemy," Judge Robinson continued, taking a small step forward. The bailiffs tensed, ready to act, but the judge raised one hand slightly, signaling them to hold their position. "You're afraid right now. I understand that fear." "I felt it too." The judge's words hung in the air, and for a moment, Mitchell's angry expression faltered. The judge took another step forward. "When I was a young man, before I became a judge, I was a public defender. I saw the best and worst of humanity every day. I saw fear turn good people into something they never meant to become." People in the courtroom watched in amazement as the judge continued to approach Mitchell, speaking in that same calm, steady voice. Mitchell's hand began to shake more visibly now. "I've sat where you were sitting," the judge said, "not as a defendant, but as someone who felt the world was against him. Someone who thought nobody understood the pressure, the daily struggles, the split-second decisions." Mitchell's breathing became ragged. The gun lowered slightly, though he didn't seem to realize it. "But pointing that gun at me won't change what brought you here," Judge Robinson continued. "It won't erase the choices you made. It will only add to your burdens." The judge was now just 10 feet away from Mitchell, close enough that everyone in the courtroom could see the sweat on Mitchell's forehead, the trembling of his hands. "I need to tell you something, James," the judge said, using Mitchell's first name for the first time. "Something about your past that you may have forgotten." Mitchell's eyes widened. The judge reached slowly into his robe pocket, causing the bailiffs to tense again, but he pulled out only an old, faded photograph. 22 years ago, a rookie cop saved a young law student from a mugging. That cop spent his own money to replace the student's stolen books. He told that student to keep fighting for justice, to make a difference in the world. The judge held up the photograph. It showed a much younger Mitchell in uniform, standing next to a young black man holding law books. "That law student was me, James, and that cop was you." The revelation hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. Mitchell's arm dropped slightly, the gun now pointing at the floor. His face contorted with confusion and recognition. "You were different then," the judge continued, moving closer. "You believed in protecting everyone, regardless of who they were. What happened to that young officer who helped a scared student? What changed you?" Tears began forming in Mitchell's eyes. The gun shook violently in his grip. "The streets change people," Mitchell whispered, his voice breaking. "The things I've seen, the things I've done. The streets didn't change you, James. You let your fear change you. You let your anger blind you to the very people you swore to protect." The judge was now close enough to reach out and touch Mitchell's arm. The entire courtroom remained frozen, watching this incredible moment unfold. "But it's not too late," Judge Robinson said softly. "You can still choose who you want to be. Right now, in this moment, you can choose." Mitchell's shoulders began to shake. The gun clattered to the floor as he dropped to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. The judge knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I remember," Mitchell choked out between sobs. "I remember who I used to be." The bailiffs quickly secured the weapon and moved to arrest Mitchell, but Judge Robinson raised his hand again. "Give him a moment," he said quietly. "Sometimes the hardest battle is the one we fight within ourselves." As Mitchell wept on the courtroom floor, everyone present knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, not just an act of courage, but an act of profound humanity. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as Mitchell remained on his knees, tears streaming down his face. Judge Robinson stayed beside him, his hand still resting gently on Mitchell's shoulder. The bailiffs stood ready but waited for the judge's signal to proceed. "James," the judge said softly, "do you remember Officer Thomas Wilson?" Mitchell looked up, his eyes red and swollen. The name seemed to strike a chord deep within him. "Tommy Wilson," he whispered, "my training officer." Judge Robinson nodded slowly. "That's right. He was my father." The revelation sent another wave of shock through the courtroom. People exchanged glances, trying to process this unexpected connection. Even the prosecutor, who had been preparing to demand immediate arrest, stood frozen in place. "Your father," Mitchell's voice cracked. "He was the best cop I ever knew. He taught me everything about being a good officer." "He taught you about more than just being a cop," the judge replied. "He taught you about being a good human being, about treating everyone with dignity and respect." Mitchell wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He used to say that the badge was a symbol of trust, not power. That we were guardians, not warriors. The judge reached into his robe again and pulled out another photograph. This one showed a younger Mitchell standing proudly next to Officer Wilson at his police academy graduation. "My father kept this photo on his desk until the day he retired," Judge Robinson said. "He always spoke highly of you, called you his best student. He believed you would carry on his legacy of fair and compassionate policing." Mitchell stared at the photo, his hands trembling as he took it from the judge. "I let him down," he said, his voice barely audible. "I let everyone down. My father saw something special in you, James. He saw your potential to make a real difference, but somewhere along the way, you lost sight of his teachings." The judge stood up slowly and addressed the courtroom. 20 years ago, my father told me about a promising young officer who went out of his way to help people in the community. An officer who organized basketball games with neighborhood kids, who checked on elderly residents, who treated everyone he met with respect. Mitchell's shoulders shook as more memories flooded back. The old lady on Maple Street, Mrs. Peterson. I used to bring her groceries every Sunday. That's right, the judge continued. And the youth center where you volunteered to teach kids about staying out of trouble. My father was so proud of that. The transformation in Mitchell was visible to everyone. The angry, defensive man who had pointed a gun at the judge was crumbling away, revealing someone broken by years of bitterness and prejudice. What happened to me? Mitchell asked, looking up at the judge with genuine confusion. When did I become this person? Fear can change us in ways we don't recognize, Judge Robinson replied. One bad experience leads to caution. Caution becomes suspicion. Suspicion becomes prejudice. Before you know it, you're not the person you started out to be. The prosecutor finally found her voice. Your Honor, with all due respect, this man just threatened you with a weapon in open court. Judge Robinson raised his hand. I'm aware of that, Counselor. But right now, we're witnessing something more important than punishment. We're witnessing the possibility of redemption. He turned back to Mitchell. James, what you did today was wrong. What you've done over the past years was wrong. But admitting that is the first step toward making things right. Mitchell nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. I want to make it right, he said. I want to be the officer your father believed I could be. It's too late for that, the judge said gently. But it's not too late to be the man he believed you could be. The bailiffs finally moved forward, helping Mitchell to his feet. As they prepared to handcuff him, Mitchell turned to the judge one last time. Tell me something, he said. Did you know who I was when this trial started? Judge Robinson smiled sadly. I recognized you the moment you walked into my courtroom. I've been waiting 20 years for you to remember who you really are. As the bailiffs led Mitchell away, the entire courtroom remained in stunned silence. They had witnessed something none of them would ever forget, the moment when justice met mercy, when a lost soul began to find its way home. The judge returned to his bench, his composure intact, but his eyes showing the emotional toll of what had just transpired. Court will recess for 1 hour, he announced. We all need time to process what we've witnessed here today. The hour-long recess felt like an eternity. News of what had happened spread through the courthouse like wildfire. Reporters gathered outside, trying to piece together the extraordinary events that had unfolded in Judge Robinson's courtroom. When court reconvened, the atmosphere was completely different. Mitchell was brought back in, this time in handcuffs, his head bowed not in anger but in shame. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in the span of an hour. Judge Robinson addressed the court with measured words. Due to the events that have transpired, I must recuse myself from this case. My personal connection to the defendant and the incident that occurred today make it impossible for me to remain impartial. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The judge continued, however, before I step down, there is something that must be addressed. He turned to Mitchell, who raised his head to meet the judge's gaze. Officer Mitchell, the defendant, has requested to address the court. Given the extraordinary circumstances, I'll allow it. Mitchell stood slowly, his hands still cuffed in front of him. He cleared his throat several times before speaking. I want to confess, he began, his voice rough with emotion, not just to the charges brought against me, but to everything. Every time I abused my power, every person I wronged, every oath I broke. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Mitchell continued, for the past 5 years, I've targeted people based on their race. I filed false reports. I'd used excessive force, and as you saw in that video, I've planted evidence. His lawyer tried to intervene, but Mitchell shook his head. No, let me finish. I need to say this. He turned to face the gallery where many of his victims sat watching. To everyone I've hurt, I am truly sorry. I became everything I swore to fight against. I let fear and hatred poison my heart, and I betrayed the badge I wore. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he continued. Judge Robinson showed me more mercy today than I ever showed anyone. He reminded me of the officer I used to be, the man I wanted to be. I can't undo what I've done, but I can start making amends. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, while this confession is unexpected, we still need to follow proper procedure. Judge Robinson nodded. Of course. A new judge will be assigned to oversee the remainder of this case. Officer Mitchell's confession will be entered into the record, and he will face the full consequences of his actions. Before leaving the bench, Judge Robinson had one final thing to say. James, my father used to tell me that it's never too late to choose the right path. Today, you've taken the first step. The road ahead will be difficult, but it's one worth walking. As Judge Robinson left the courtroom, Mitchell called out, "Your father would be proud of you, sir. You're everything he hoped you would become." The judge paused at the door, nodded once, and then was gone. In the days that followed, Mitchell's case was assigned to Judge Peterson, who accepted his guilty plea to all charges. During the sentencing hearing, Mitchell didn't ask for leniency. Instead, he asked for the opportunity to make things right. "I want to work with the prison reform program," he told the court. "I want to help other officers avoid the mistakes I made. I want to speak out against the very prejudices that consumed me." The victims who testified showed remarkable grace. Some accepted his apology, others remained skeptical, but all acknowledged the dramatic change they had witnessed. Judge Peterson sentenced Mitchell to 12 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 8. "Your genuine remorse and willingness to take responsibility have been noted," she said, "but actions have consequences and justice must be served." As Mitchell was led away to begin his sentence, he carried himself differently. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet determination to become the man Officer Wilson had believed he could be. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Judge Robinson watched from a distance. His secretary approached him quietly. "Do you think he'll really change?" The judge smiled sadly. "Change is always possible, Margaret. Sometimes it just takes someone believing in us when we've forgotten how to believe in ourselves." That day marked the beginning of a long journey for James Mitchell. A journey from darkness to light, from hatred to understanding, from being part of the problem to becoming part of the solution. The road to redemption had begun. 5 years had passed since that dramatic day in the courtroom. The story of Officer Mitchell and Judge Robinson had become legendary in legal circles, taught in police academies and law schools as an example of restorative justice. Inside the state correctional facility, Mitchell had become a different man. His cell was neat and organized, with books about social justice, psychology, and police reform stacked on a small shelf. He spent his days working in the prison library and leading discussion groups about bias and prejudice. The prison reform program had embraced Mitchell's transformation. He became their most effective speaker, talking to new inmates about taking responsibility for their actions. His story resonated particularly with former law enforcement officers who found themselves on the wrong side of the bars. "I used to think I was better than the people I arrested," Mitchell would tell them. "But I was worse because I betrayed the trust placed in me." The badge doesn't make you superior, it makes you responsible. One morning, Mitchell received an unexpected letter. The envelope bore the official seal of the state judicial system. With trembling hands, he opened it to find a handwritten note from Judge Robinson. "James," it read, "I've been invited to speak at the National Judicial Conference about bias in the justice system. I would like to share your story with your permission. More importantly, I would like to read your recent letter of apology to the community. Your words could help prevent others from making the same mistakes." Mitchell sat on his bunk, overwhelmed by emotion. He had written that apology letter months ago, pouring his heart onto paper, never expecting it would reach beyond the prison walls. 2 weeks later, Judge Robinson stood before hundreds of judges, lawyers, and law enforcement officials at the conference. Behind him, a large screen displayed a live video feed from the prison. "Ladies and gentlemen," the judge began, "5 years ago, I faced a man who pointed a gun at me in my own courtroom. Today, I want you to hear from that same man." The screen flickered to life, showing Mitchell in his prison uniform, sitting in a small room. His hair had grayed at the temples, and his eyes carried the weight of genuine remorse. "Thank you, Judge Robinson," Mitchell began. "To everyone watching, I want you to know that the man who committed those crimes, who held that gun, was lost in his own fear and hatred. But people can change. I'm living proof of that." He continued, "Every day, I work to undo the damage I caused. I speak to new recruits via video conference, sharing my story as a warning. I've helped develop training programs about unconscious bias. I've written to each of my victims, not asking for forgiveness, but offering sincere apologies." The conference room was silent as Mitchell spoke about his journey. He talked about the books he'd read, the conversations he'd had with fellow inmates of all backgrounds, and the painful process of confronting his own prejudices. Judge Robinson showed me that day that true strength isn't about power or control. It's about compassion, understanding, and the courage to see the humanity in everyone, even in someone pointing a gun at you. After the video ended, Judge Robinson addressed the audience. James Mitchell has 6 more years before he's eligible for parole, but his impact on criminal justice reform has already begun. 3 police departments have adopted the anti-bias training program he helped develop. His victim impact statements are being used in academies nationwide. The judge paused, looking out at the audience. We often talk about justice as punishment, but true justice includes the possibility of redemption. It includes the hope that people can change, learn, and grow from their mistakes. Months later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Judge Robinson made an unexpected visit to the prison. He sat across from Mitchell in the visitor's room, 2 men whose lives had become intertwined in the most unusual way. "Your father would be proud of you," Mitchell said softly. The judge smiled. "He'd be proud of both of us, James. You for finding your way back, and me for helping you see the path." As they talked, both men knew that while the past couldn't be changed, the future was still being written. Mitchell's story had become more than just a cautionary tale. It had become a testament to the power of second chances and the enduring capacity for human transformation. In the end, justice had been served not just through punishment, but through the profound change in one man's heart, and that change would ripple outward, touching countless lives for years to come.